This is part 2 of Wine Talks British Business with Steven Spurrier. I'd just like to go a little bit earlier back in your career, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just because you mentioned it then, but whilst you were in Paris, you did own some restaurants and other businesses. They didn't quite pan out. What was it you learned from that experience?
Well, I expanded. The wine shop was doing well. The academy was doing well. I was frankly not getting a bit bored with it, but my daughter has a phrase for me, which she said, "Your problem, Dad, is you're bored with the present." The restaurant, which just up the street in the same little passage, was for sale, and I thought it'd be fun to own it. So I bought it, and it didn't work out partially because the manager I installed was completely crooked. But
okay.
And it was successful, but financially disastrous. There were too many people with their hands in the till. But the mistake was expanding outside my comfort zone. Had I just kept the Academy de Vin and the Cave, financially I would have been fine.
Okay.
And I wrote, in 1983, I began to write some books. The Academy de Vin wine course, which was very successful, sold about 150,000 copies in 6 languages. The Academy de Vin Guide to French Wines, French Country Wines, French Fine Wines. I wrote 5 books in 3 years. And that meant that I took my eye off the ball in Paris almost completely. By that time, we were back in London, so I was commuting. I was only in Paris Wednesday through Saturday. So it's not surprising that things began to fall apart a bit, and then the center of business moved to La Défense. And La Défense was not the Madeleine, so I lost a high proportion of my clientele.
Okay.
It just ran out of puff. The Cave Madeleine, having been probably one of the most successful wine shops in Paris, became an unsuccessful wine shop. Simple as that.
I think that it's important to note within what you're saying with the businesses, and then also having had the success of the tasting, is that a lot of this is trying. And forgive me for using the word blind, but essentially it is like the blind tastings, and it is putting yourself out there. Some of them have panned out, some of them are successes, some of them haven't. What do you think you've learned from a lot of that? Because there's a lot there.
Well, I think, as I said, the main thing to have learned in hindsight is not to expand outside your comfort zone. I knew nothing about nothing about running restaurants. I couldn't have run it myself. I bought the wine shop because I knew how I could run it.
Yeah.
I couldn't run a restaurant. We've got the Bride Valley Vineyard here, but we don't have a winery. If Furley Estate wasn't 25 minutes away, where we take the grapes and makes the wine, I would not have planted the vines.
Okay.
Because by that time I'd learned. I know nothing about winemaking, and so why spend £700,000 or £800,000 building a winery if you don't know what to do once you're in it? And I was, with the mindset I had, having inherited all this money when I was very young, it was a tremendous freedom to do what one wanted and to be able to acquire things one wanted to acquire. But also I developed the problematic habit of throwing money at a problem.
Right, okay.
Which is not the answer and was not the answer. And so basically, in 1989, I went bust. I sold my businesses for £1. I lost everything.
Okay.
Lost absolutely everything. And retired with a couple of £100,000, with substantial debts.
Okay. There's a lot of rebuilding though since.
Well, then I recycled myself. I realized that I couldn't have a business anymore. I didn't want to employ anyone anymore. So I completely recycled myself as a wine consultant. I ran the Harrods wine department for 6 months. That was very good to be back, bang in the middle of the London wine trade.
Half of it, yeah.
But I rather put my head above the parapet and I only lasted 6 months because people were talking about me and not Harrods,
Okay.
which I didn't intend them to do, but they were. And so now Spurrier has come to Harrods, and so the hierarchy in Harrods didn't like that, so I was sacked. But then I was sitting next to Sarah Kemp at the benevolent dinner about a year after that. And she said, Stephen, what are you doing? How's the Harrods job? I said, Harrods job, Sarah, is a year ago I was sacked. Come and work for the Decanter. And so I began writing for the Decanter in 1993. And my last column was in May this year.
Yes.
So, and that was, in my memoirs, one chapter is called Au revoir, Paris. And that was Au revoir, Paris. Just everything getting lost. The next short chapter is The Road Back.
Okay.
This is basically Harrods and a few other. And I got Singapore Airlines as a wine consultant. That was really vital. And then the next big chapter is Life with the Decanter,
cool.
Which was fabulous. And that really put me back on the map, made my name. It is what I love doing, writing articles about places I'd been. And the next chapter was Free as a Bird, because by that time I'd paid off the debts. I was well known. I was Steven Spurrier, not Steven Spurrier Marchand de Vin, the Steven Spurrier Marchand de Vin wine merchant. The brand I created in Paris had gone for good. That just ceased to exist.
Yeah.
But I was Steven Spurrier.
First time you progressed on though.
Yeah. And so, along with Jancis is obviously much more famous, Hugh. But I was in that package with Serena Sutcliffe and everything like that, and could not have been happier. So that's it.
I've got two quotes here. I want to make sure I get these right. And you've referred to Burgundy as the holy grail. There's an emotional hit to the wines, whereas with Bordeaux, it's got an intelligent hit. I was just wondering, can you tell me more about what you meant by that and what that means to you?
Well, I think there's both a mystery and a magic about Burgundy that you kind of don't know, or you almost certainly do not know how it's going to taste before you taste it. On the rare occasions I taste a really great wine like a Chambertin or a Mutiny or a La Tâche, I don't have any preconception, except I know I know where the vineyards are. But when you taste Lafite or Mouton or Margaux, you know exactly what to expect.
Yeah.
And so basically the classic Bordeaux are playing totally on the vineyard, as are the Burgundies, but the Grand Vin of Lafite will only be 30 or 40% of the total production of Lafite.
Sure.
And it can achieve perfection, but it doesn't have the magic. Okay. And the perfection is not bad. A beautifully made bit of furniture, a beautifully played piece of music is absolutely wonderful.
Of course, yeah.
But Burgundy is both mysterious and magical, or it can be. And so that's why I put them in different categories.
I think it's, as you say, it's important to have that distinction, because you could have something that's technically spot on, but it doesn't have to be that, particularly with wine. It's not about being spot on in that sense. I wanted to carry on with another wine, just get this quote right again. I think the oldest wine that you've tried is from 1806, which was a Lafite. Yeah. Can you remember much about that?
Well, funny enough, I can, because I refer to it quite often. This was in 1969, and we were a group of 6 of us, and it was an American friend of mine, very close friend, David Fromkin, who was mad about Burgundy, but he'd seen the Lafite 1806 on the wine list of Darros in Villeneuve-de-Marsan, and he'd never tasted a wine that old. And so he put together a small group of friends, Martin Bamford, who sadly died in 82, Rick Hurland, a friend of his. And then, anyway, so we went to Villeneuve-de-Marsan and ordered in advance the 1806 Lafite. Before that, we'd had probably some Dom Perignon. And then after that, we'd had some Montrachet, because we had Burgundies apart from Lafite. And I had told Monsieur Darros it should not be decanted, because we didn't want too much aeration. So
of course,
it was poured very carefully into 7 glasses. We were 6. And Mr. Darros took 1 glass, and he took it around the room, because everyone had seen the wines laid out who was in the restaurant. Their eyes were on stalks.
Of course, yeah.
And it was still, the color was still red. I mean, faded roses, but red, not pink, but it was red.
Yeah.
And the aroma was fruit,
Still fresh,
rose-like fruit.
Okay.
Delicate, of course, not powerful. And it lasted in the glass and in the palate for about half an hour, and then it just fell apart, just gone. But it was magical. And to taste and drink a wine which was 150 years old it had been recorked at the chateau in 1953.
So if we come all the way back to the present day, shall we say, recently you reclaimed the rights to the brand L'Académie de Vin, which obviously you've mentioned quite a bit already, but how are you using it now? What are the plans for it moving forward?
In 2017, I was very flattered to be named Decanter Man of the Year. And I was also very flattered to be named on chairman of the WSET. But Decanter offered me a lunch at the Gavroche, which of course I didn't turn down. And she said, we can go to 70 people. And so I invited people, from many of whom were pre-Men of the Year. Angelo Gaia, Aubert de Villaine, Eduardo Chadwick, Christian Moix, and of course Jancis Robinson too. I mean, it was the Almanac de Gotha and of course all my family were there.
Yeah.
And Mireia Torres, Peter Femfort, and Patricia Gallagher, of course, who was my partner in the Académie de Vin, with whom I've remained in close contact, came over from Paris. When she went back, she realized that really everything had started at l'Académie de Vin.
Yes.
She was looking around the room, and there were all these people who used to come to l'Académie de Vin 25 years previously, or 30 years previously. And she looked into the registration of the name, and the name had not been registered since 1987,
right,
when I had registered myself.
Yeah.
And it had fallen into the public domain. And so between Patricia and I and Mark Nadeau from Toronto in Canada, who had a branch of l'Académie de Vin in Toronto, in part of his wine establishment. And then when I sold, he just didn't carry on with it. But we re-registered the name. There was already an Académie de Vin in Tokyo, which I had founded with them, and I'm honorary president of. I founded that in 87, which when I said that was why I'd registered the name. And we registered the name L'Académie de Vin really all around the English-speaking world, thinking we might find people to run wine schools.
Oh, okay. Right.
But it didn't happen. And so even in Paris, I contacted Michel Bertin, who'd been my top prof, and he said, Stephen, I'd love to do a tasting every now and then, but I'm very busy.
Sure.
Georges Lepre, who used to be at the Ritz, said the same thing. And Mark Williamson, we were going to be based at Mark Williamson's restaurant, Maceo. And Mark said, I'm happy to give my upstairs room over to courses for the Académie de Vin, but I've got to charge an expensive rent. And so it didn't happen. So
of course,
I was very happy to have re-registered the brand, but I suddenly found myself doing nothing with it. And then lunching with Hugh Johnston and Ben Hawkins, discussing the wine books being published today, I said they're either wine guides or they're what to buy. I mean, there's no history of wine. There are no stories. Hugh said, well, we both remember the books we were brought up with, and why don't we recreate them? And so we decided that we would, either create our own books or whatever, and use La Carte de Vin name. So it's La Carte de Vin Library.
Yeah.
And the first book we published, I've got them all out there, there are now 7 of them, was a commemorative edition of Michael Broadbent's wine tasting, which basically created La Carte de Vin. Without Michael Broadbent, who is my mentor, not that he taught me or mentored me individually, but he was my mentor, the person I learned everything from.
Yeah.
There would have been no Academy de Vin had it not been for Michael Broadbent's wine tasting, because Michael Broadbent's wine tasting said everything you needed to know about wine tasting. So that was the commemorative edition, our first book, which we published 2 days before Michael's 92nd birthday. Then Fiona Morrison of Le Pen, we published her book, 10 Great European Wine Families. Then sherry, Ben Harkins wrote his book on sherry. Misunderstood, maligned, magnificent. And then we had In Vino Veritas, which is a little bit my baby, which is a compendium of writing from the past and the present. And there was a marvelous book edited by Cyril Ray over many years called The Complete Imbiber.
Okay.
And it was everyone's Christmas present. And In Vino Veritas, we're publishing it again next year, is going to be everyone's Christmas present, because you can delve back into the past and all that kind of stuff. And this year we published Chateau Musard, History of an Iconic Wine. We published On Bordeaux, which unfortunately I've got a copy in my office, in my study, which is very interesting. We republished Hugh's The Story of Wine, which I think will be a huge success. Why on earth that went out of print, I have no idea, because it is the story of wine. And Hugh, who wrote it 35 years ago, didn't change a word.
It's a very in-depth book.
He said, no, it's a story of wine. It stops, I think, in 1980. He said, from Noah to now.
Yes.
And he wrote a very long introduction explaining why he did not want to update it. Because, anyway, and then we will have a re-edition of my own book, which has a new title called A Life in Wine, in mid-November. And that's it for this year. But we will have 9 books out by the end of this year. And I think we don't sell into bookstores, because we sell on Amazon, we sell directly to the public, and we're finding distributors in each country. Mark Nadeau, for instance, who has got La Carte de Vin and is giving wine courses, or will do once all this COVID thing is over, in Toronto, where there's a very vibrant wine scene. He's the distributor in Toronto. Bartholomew Broadbent, Michael's son, is a distributor in Richmond, Virginia, and into Washington. We've got the Napa Valley Wine School, where I did the webinar 2 days ago for California.
Yeah.
And so we're selling books, and I'm convinced. Well, I could not be happier, because it is something which will go on, as will Bright Valley, I hope, to the next generation and the next generation after that. We are recreating literature of wine.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're making it accessible for people, because nobody knows it's there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think there's no hint of a guidebook. We're publishing. Ben will write a book, Port and the Douro, helped by Sarah Ahmed. We've got On California, which will be the companion volume to On Bordeaux. We're publishing Peter Vinding-Deer's memoirs. Peter Vinding-Deer's is wonderful Danish guy who's made wine all over the world. and a complete aristocrat, both in terms of fact and in terms of outlook on life. And he published his book in Danish, and it was called A Handful of Olives and a Glass of Wine. And I have renamed it A Viking in the Vineyards. And he doesn't like that, but that's what it's going to be called. And that's going to be, and his memoirs will be very different from mine. So each year we're going to have memoir. We're going to, we've got a very interesting memoirs. I can't talk about it because the contract has not been signed, but that will be the third set of memoirs. And I think, so we have segments like the memoirs, the wineries, and Chateau Musard was the first winery. The second winery book I want to do is probably Mondavi, and Tim Mondavi is writing a book about his family. Mm-hmm. And these will be based on wineries and families which have done almost as much for their country, if not more, as they have for themselves.
Sure.
When you look at Musard put Lebanese wines on the map. Okay, so, and then we have regional titles. We have in Vino Veritas, and then we publish in relatively small amounts, but we can always reprint. And being a library, I don't want any of that kind of library books ever to be out of print.
Of course.
So that, of course, it's inevitable that some of them might fall by the wayside. But I want in 5 years' time, we'll have 20 books at least. And it's a library. And so a wine lover or just somebody interested in wine can look at our list and know that every single one of those books is still in print and still available.
And there's something very appealing about having the physical object of a book to flick through, particularly with a glass of wine.
So. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Stephen, let's come right up to the present day now with some of the other projects, which is Bride Valley, where we are and what we're doing. Can you tell me more about your future plans for your wine?
Well, I mean, we had our 10th vintage this year. Very disappointing in terms of quantity, which many of our colleagues down in the Southwest suffered from the same thing. And we don't know why. Well, I don't know why. We had a good flowering. And, by June, we were looking at, by July, we were looking at 40,000 bottles, which is a bottle of wine, just about. We ended up with 19,000.
Okay.
Tiny berries, tiny bunches, not enough of them, and so not much juice. But in 2018 and 2019, we made an average of 55,000 bottles, which is really quite high. My 10-year average has to be, for this business to work, a bottle of wine.
Okay.
So we've got 42,000 vines, and I need to make 42,000 bottles. But from the 2018 vintage, we made some still Pinot Noir, which you'll taste. We made some still Chardonnay, which is a knockout. And in 2019, we made a Chardonnay and a Rosé. And 2020, we'll still make a Chardonnay and a Rosé. So it had never occurred to me to make still wine. But I'd always said to myself, if ever the opportunity presents itself, I'd love to make some still wine. Well, I'll ask Ian Edwards to make still wine. And it's proving very popular because, of course, our still wines are 17 pounds, 18 pounds, and the sparkling wines are 30. So the vineyard is not going to expand. We got a block of a hectare of Pinot Meunier, which is pretty damned hopeless. And I'm going to give it one more year. And if it doesn't perform next year, I'm going to rip it out and I'm going to plant truffle trees. We've already commissioned 500 truffle trees.
Okay, wow.
They're going in November. They're going in next month, right at the back of the vineyard because we've got very good soil. And so the truffle trees come from France and they're already injected with the truffle spore. So I tend to have some black diamonds quite soon, or rather in the course of time. But I think truffle trees will be kind of a fun thing to do. But The vineyard won't expand. We've got another 2 hectares we could plant on another part of the farm, but I don't want to do that. We're a very small operation. Graham Fisher is our vineyard manager, who came from Night Timber, and he's worked a bit all over the world. He's fantastic. His wife, Mo, is in charge of marketing a couple of days a week. Jackie runs the office, administration, everything, sales. So totally, the administration side wouldn't function without Jackie.
Okay.
And then we have a 1 day a week bookkeeper. And then there's Bella and I, who are owners, and so we're the brand, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so, well, the aim is that we're going elitist. That's to say, I'm not at all ashamed to say that our plan is to separate Bride Valley a little bit from the very big wineries, and really concentrate on what we've got here.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen, there's been a huge amount of planting over the last 2 or 3 years. There was 1 million hectares planted, there were 1 million vines planted last year. Well, that's 1 million bottles. Okay.
Yeah.
So production has gone up from 3 million bottles in to 2015 to 6.5 million now, maybe even more. And previously, there was more demand than supply. Now, when the 18s come on stream, there will be more supply than demand. And at that point, previously, we've all been friends. Camel Valley. Next year, we won't be friends.
Okay.
Because the big boys will be after market share, and they'll cut their prices. I have no intention of doing that.
Yeah.
So I'm really, and we've opened, well, where we are now in the tasting room visitor center, I really intend to capitalize on what we have here, try and bring people down here. We're forming a club. There'll be no entrance fee, but we are forming the Wine Valley Vineyard Members Club, which they'll get an automatic discount of 15%. And people get 5% at the cellar door just by turning up, because they've come to us off retail price. But they don't get any further discounts unless they buy a large amount. And so, whereas when I started, I thought it would be all national distribution through Liberty Wines, who are perfect, and export. Now, if I can progressively over the next 3 years bring national distribution and export down to 50%, and we sell to a lot of restaurants and cafes around here, and direct sales, whether it's direct sales, well, direct Dorset sales and club sales to 50%.
Okay.
Then I'll be fine, because obviously the margins are much higher.
Of course.
And we can, the big problem, as we saw in 2020, is unreliability of volume. We simply have no clue. Well, I have no clue, looking at the figures, what we're going to get.
Yeah.
And so that's something which we have to be very much aware of. An average of a bottle of wine will see us home and dry, even with 80% wholesale.
Yeah.
It'll wash its face. But if I drop below that and I don't create a private clientele, then I lose money, and I'd rather not.
Well, you still need that cash injection essentially coming directly in, don't you?
Well, I mean, there's another at least 150 to go in, 150,000 to go in between now and next June. And then the cash from the 18 should come back in. I intend, inevitably, we will be cash flow positive from June onwards, just because we have 100,000 bottles of sparkling wine. Well, even at a wholesale price of £12 a bottle or £13 a bottle, that's 1.3 million. So, inevitably, 2021, 22, 23, 24, we should be cash flow positive.
Should be a great place to be. It's
a great place to be. But then, of course, with the 2020 vintage, I already know I'm going to show a loss of at least 50 grand on this current vintage.
We have been to so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing every story. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to mention?
I think just that wine is a cultural object. It's an agricultural product, but it's a cultural object, and it should not be forgotten.
Yeah.
As such, wine, as you said, the story of wine has been around for 6,000-7,000 years. Something the Bible said, wine that maketh glad the heart of man, and oil to give him a cheerful countenance. And in Hugh's book, Story of Wine, the power to banish care. So people got drunk after a hard day shooting elephants. They used to have the fermented juice of the grape, and make them feel a bit better. It's brought so much to my life. I mean, I always said that wine is the 3 Ps. It's the place, the people. So the place is generally wonderful, generally nice, seeing vineyards. Okay,
yeah.
The people are generally really good guys and interesting. And if they're bad guys, they'll make bad wine. And so the place plus the people equals the product, which is good. And it's good now from top to bottom. I mean, you go to Lidl or Aldi, you buy a £6 bottle of wine. It's nice and drinkable. And I can no longer afford Cru Classes, but I buy the second wine from Cru Classes. And there's so many wines out there. I mean, that I just wish. I'm trying to major buying now on Italian wine. That's what I'm buying most of.
Okay.
But Chianti and things like that, and also Italian whites from Friuli, Venezia Giulia. But my cellar is so European, and it's 70% French. And I almost wish it wasn't, because that's what I've been buying all this time. And if I could start again, I would be more adventurous. Not New World. No, I mean, I love New World wine, but Bella's cooking and the ambiance here is not really New World. I mean, so because our whole train de vie is Old World.
Yeah.
So I do have some chili. I have maybe 300 or 400 bottles of New World wine, probably 10% of my cellar. But it's not what I go for. I'm becoming, in my old age, more and more European.
Okay. I don't think that's surprising at all, hearing you speak.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think wine is there to be enjoyed. It's there to be talked about. Hugh Johnson's definition of a fine wine is a wine worth talking about. And it's there to be enjoyed in any way you want.
Absolutely. It is. I mean, as we mentioned, it's a talking point.
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you. It's been wonderful to sit down with you.
Thank you very much, Guy.
Not at all, no. Thank you.
Thank you.